So we're up to Memches, and we're going to look on Mem Zayin Amid Beis, two lines up before the end of the Amid Tanur Rabbana. So now we're talking about the Kivsei Atzeres of Chag HaShavuos, and these kvasim were brought together with the Shtei Lechem. And the purpose of the Shtei Lechem was to be Matir Chodosh in the Migdash. So the Brisa says the following: Shochat Shnei Kvasim al arba chalos. Now there's supposed to be two chalos, and he went ahead and he prepared four chalos, and then he went ahead and shechted the kvasim. Is Moshe shtayim mehem umenifam? He'll just take two out of the four chalos, and he'll do tnufa because there's a halacha that you have to take the kvasim and you have to do a tnufa, waving, and that tnufa is mekadesh the shtei lechem. So he's got to separate from the four, take off two, and then go ahead and do the tnufa. Vashar and the other two, necholos bepijon. In other words, although the kvasim through shchita are mekadesh the shtei lechem, and that upgrades the shtei lechem from the status of kedushas domim to kedushas haguf. However, since he had four and only two are subject to the sanctification of the kvasim, the other two remain in the original status of kodshe bedek habayis, meaning kedushas domim, and that lends itself to pidyon. So you could be poda those other two lechamim. And now the Gemara is going to take a second look at this brisa. Amru Rabbana Kami Rav Chizda ha delo Rebbe. This brisa contradicts Rebbe. Why? We had a machlokes between Rebbe and Rabbi Lezer as to what is mekadesh the shtei lechem. Is it just the shchita alone, or you need both the shchita and the zrikas adam? And Rebbe was of the opinion that all you need is the shchita does the job. The Ike Rebbe, if you're going to interpret this Mishnah according to Rebbe, that this brisa according to Rebbe, then Kevan di Omer Shchita Makadsha, since Shchita does a one-man show, and in and of itself the Shchita is sufficient to be Makadish the Shtei Lechem, therefore, the Parak Luhu Hecha. How do you understand the pidyon of the other two lechamim? Ide Parak Luhu Me'avroi, if you're going to have to take them outside of the Azara in order to generate a psul yotze, and then you go ahead and you do the pidyon, then keva dechsiv lifnei Hashem ifsul hu biyotze. You cannot remove these two lechamim, the extra two, and take them out of the Azara without engendering a psul, because the Torah says that the lechem of the shtei lechem of Shavuos, of Chag Atzeres, has to be brought lifnei Hashem in the Azara. So the moment you take it out of the Azara, it becomes possible. And therefore, if it becomes possible, then we apply the principle of Yotze. And once we apply the psul of Yotze, right? Let's say, for example, the Gemara is entertaining the possibility that we'll take out all four lechamim out of the Azara, and we want to be poded two out of the four that remain with kedushas domim. Those two that are part of the Tnufa, they will have a kedusha of kedusha saguf, and they don't allow, they doesn't lend itself to pidyon. But now we have a problem because we have four lechamim. Which ones are niskadis b'kedusha saguf, and which ones are not? So therefore, we have to go lechumra, as Rashi points out here, and we have to assume that all four of them should be considered as if they had kedushas haguf, because in fact, two out of the four certainly do. The other two are a suffix. We don't know. And therefore, once there's kedushas haguf, then there's a psul of yotze. And if there's a psul of yotze, then obviously there's no possibility of pidyon. Neither with the two that were niskadish because they have kedushas haguf, and neither with the other two, because the other two we don't know. Maybe they have Kiddush Saguf, and once you took them out of the Azara, they were Posel Midin Yotzei. Ibe Gavoy, if on the other hand, you're going to do the Pidyon process while the Lechamim are still located in the Azara, then you have a problem. Why? Because what are you doing? You're bringing in two Lechamim that are extra, and they don't have the status of Kiddush Saguf because the Shechita is not Makadish them, and then you brought them into the Azara. That's a prohibition. We're not allowed to bring Chulin into the Azara. Hama'ayil Chulin Azara. Now, if on the other hand, this brisa would reflect the Shita of Rabbi Elazar of Shimon, who holds that the Kiddush process requires not just Shechita, but also Zrika, so that means that even after the Shechita, there's no Kedushas Haguf. All you have is Kedushas Domim. So let's just take two out of the four Lechamim, do a Tnufa with them, and then we'll do a Zrikas Adam for those two Lechamim, and the Zrikas Adam of the Shnei Kfosim that'll be Makadish, now complete the Kiddush process on those two Lechamim, and now we take the other two Lechamim, bring them outside of the Azara, and now we can be Poda them because they only have Kedushas Kedushas Domim and not Kedushas Aguf. So the Gemara right now says in the name of Chisda that you don't have to go that far. There's no reason, argues Rav Chisda against the Rabbanon, to interpret our Mishnah according to Rabbi Eliezer Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah could be reconciled even with Rebbe. And Amar Rav Chisda, Amalu Rav Chisda, he says to the Rabbanon, Li Olam Ki Rebbe. And what are we going to do? Uparik Le Begavoy. We're going to take the Lechamim inside the Azara, and we're going to do the Pidyon on it. And then v'chulin memela kahavyan. It's not like it became chulin when I took it into the Azara. At the point that I took it into the Azara, it had Kiddush Asdamim, and that's sufficient to allow you to bring them into the Azara. Ella what? After the Pidyon, that's when they become chulin. And the Gemara holds now that the Isser of chulin ba'Azara is only when you have chulin and you take it into the Azara. But if you take it into the Azara before it became chulin and you do an action of pidyon to make it into chulin, there's no Isser of chulin ba'Azara. Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi Vatanya, we have a brisa that says, Kshu podon ein podom ela b'chutz, meaning that this brisa will confirm our original position that you can't do the pidyon inside the Azara, because if you do the pidyon inside the Azara, then immediately at the split second that you do pidyon, there's a chalos kedushas domim, and if there's kedushas, and there's a chalos chulin because the kedushas domim was now transferred, and what you're left with is chulin, and you've brought chulin to the Azara. Even though you didn't bring it into the Azara, but nevertheless the pidyon itself engenders chulin b'Azara, and that you're not allowed to do. And therefore, based on this brisa, we see that the pidyon could not be done inside the Azara. It has to be done outside the Azara, because otherwise, if you do the pidyon again in the Azara, then you're bringing chulin into the Azara. So the Gemara therefore says, Havadai, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, who, and therefore you don't have a Kiddush Saguf until after Zrika. And therefore the Shechita itself would not engender a Kiddush Saguf, so that what are you left with? A Kiddush Domim, and that lends itself to pidyon. To E Rebbe, Ha'ifsalu b'yotze, according to Rebbe, since the Shechita itself is Makadish the Lechem, therefore the Lechem now takes on Kiddush Saguf. Once it takes on Kiddush Saguf, it lends itself to the Psul of Yotze, and therefore this whole possibility of pidyon on the outside is impossible. Let's see a statement of Rabbi Yochanan and a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah, and based on that machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and and Chizkiah, we're going to have a real major kasha, a stira, a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. Why to Itmar? We have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah with regard to Toda, Sheshchata al Shmonim chalos, right? A carbon Toda has to be accompanied by 40 lechamim that are divided up into 4 parts, 10 lechamim of each species. And instead, what he did was he brought 80 lechamim. He brought twice the number of lechamim that he had to do with the carbon Toda, and he went ahead and he shechted the carbon Toda. And the shechita of the carbon Toda to Zoif a kiddush on the lechem. And Chizkiah is of the opinion that Kodshu Arba Mitoch Shmonim. That Enochinami, we don't know which of the 40 are sanctified by virtue of the shechita of the Toda, but nevertheless, the other 40 are not sanctified. Because the Torah says that you bring only 40 lechamim with the Toda. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Lo Kodshu Arba Mitoch Shmonim. Rabbi Yochanan says that there's no such thing as a kiddush that only works partially and not completely. It's, I guess, what you'd call an all or nothing proposition. And if he can't be mekadesh all of the lechamim that he brought with the Toda, for example, now he brought 80 and he can only be mekadesh 40, then even the kiddush of 40 cannot be valid. Now, let's go back to the case of Toda and see how it compares to the case of Kivsei Atzeres, of the kvasim that are brought together with the lechamim of the shtei lechem of carbon kvasim, of the carbon shlomim of kvasim. We just had a brisa that established that if you brought 4 lechamim instead of 2 with the kvasim, then the kiddush of 2 of them is chal, but the kiddush on the other 2 is not chal. According to Rabbi Yochanan, in carbon Toda, when you had 80 lechamim, then we said that the kiddush of the shchitas hatoda does not tuoif, it doesn't accomplish any sort of kiddush on the lechamim, because you have 80 instead of 40. So the Gemara says that's not a kasha against Rabbi Yochanan. Why lav itmar Allah? Didn't we have a comment of Rabbi Zera to qualify the machlokas between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, who said, Hakol modim hechad yom lekadosh. Even Rabbi Yochanan would agree on the one condition that there is a kiddush on 40 out of the 80 through the shechita of the Toda, and that's in a case where he declared verbally, explicitly, Likachu arba mitoch shmonim. I want the kiddush through the shechita of the Toda to be effectuated only on 40 out of the 80. And in that case, Rabbi Yochanan says that since he said it explicitly, the kiddush is limited to the 40. And Hachidami here will apply the same principle to the kvasim and the shtei lechem, which he brought 4 lechamim. He made a declaration, I want the shechita of the kvasim to effectuate a kiddush only on 2 out of the 4 lechamim. And that he could do even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, we have a brisa that was quoted by Rabbi Chanina, who came from a place called Tirasa, hopefully not Tehran, I don't know, coming to Rabbi Yochanan in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan. What did it say in the brisa? Shochat arba kvasim al shtei chalos. Now it's the opposite case. Instead of 4 lechamim on 2 kvasim, he's got 4 kvasim on 2 lechamim. And he went ahead and he did the shechita, but instead of shechting 2 kvasim with the shtei lechem, which he should have, he went ahead and he shechted 4 kvasim. Now let's watch out over here, because the zrika of the dam has to be a double zrika, meaning you've got to have a split over here. You've got to have a zrika of 2 out of the 4 kvasim for the sake of kiddush of the shtei lechem. I shouldn't call it shtei lechem. We call it shtei chalos. I think that would make more sense for us here. And then the additional two kvasim would have to have its own zrika. Because, like in any zevach, the zrika as the culmination of the avoda is matir the emurim for haktar al gabi mizbeach and the basar for achila for the kohanim, or in the case of shlomim for the Yisraelim as well. So now the Brisa says, Moshech shnayim mihem v'zorek damam shelo lishma. This is a paradox that only exists in the world of kosher. We know that every avoda in a zevach should be done lishma. And the Gemara now brings a brisa with the following paradoxical possibility. Namely, that if you did the shchita lishma or the zrika lishma, it would be possible. But if you did it shalol lishma, it's going to be kosher. And that's what it says over here, zorek damam shalol lishma. Why? Let's go through the logic. Im ata omer kach hifsadeta tachronet. Right? Excuse me for just a second, only because the times are very unusual. I am going to stop to take this. So we're getting back on track over here. And the issue is, why would you do a zrika on two of the kvasim out of the four that he brought, shalol lishman? And the answer is, im iata omer kach, if you're going to go ahead and do a zrika lishma, not only on the first two, which again, that zrika is going to be makadesh the shtei lechem, because two kvasim are makadesh the shtei lechem, but now you're going to go ahead on the other kvasim, and you're going to do a zrika lishma, that you can't do. Now, in order to appreciate the next three words, if sadata es achronim, so we have to go back to a principle of Rab Zera, which is back on Mem Zayin, on the previous daf. And let me just sort of give a little bit of a summary of what happened with Rab Zera. Rab Zera says the following, that if you had a zevach that at one point in time was ra'ui, was fitting for an avoda lishma. When I say avoda, I mean all four avodos. So, for example, you did the shchita lishma, which is fine. Now, that carbon becomes rejected. It's called dachui. And according to Reb Zera, the only way that you could possibly now salvage that carbon is if you do the avoda, for example, the zrika, shalol lishma. Okay, so now let's see how we apply Reb Zera to our case, where he brought four kvasim instead of two for the kivsei atzeres of the shtei lechem. If you're going to go ahead now, after you did the zrika of two kvasim, that will be mekadesh the shtei lechem, and now you're going to go ahead and do another zrika on the other two kvasim lishma, then according to Reb Zera, it's going to be dachui. Why? Because at one point in time, it was roy to be part of the shtei lechem, meaning the two kvasim that accompany the shtei lechem. Now it's no longer there. And if we apply Reb Zera's principle of dichui, then there's no way out of here. The only possibility is that you do a shchita, or in this case, a zrika, shalol lishma. Now, what happens in the shalol lishma? Then the carbon goes through a transformation, and it converts itself, so to speak, to two kvasim that are on their own, that have no connection, and they're not combined without a tziruf to the original shtei lechem. And in that case, the carbon will be kosher. Again, it's eina ola l'bayil l'shem chova, but in this case, there was no chova. The tzibur, the community, only had a chova to bring two kvasim, which they did, and the zrika of those two kvasim were lishma. Now we have another two kvasim, and the only way you could salvage those two kvasim is if you do zrika shalolishma and you transform the carbon into a carbon that stands independent of the shnei kvasim that are connected to the shtel lechem. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan responds to this Rabbi Chanina Tirasa. And he says to him the following, it's very nice that you want to salvage the other two kvasim, but you're not allowed to shech them or be zorik them with an avoda of shalol lishma. So you're going to have a heter that's going to allow you to do a chet, namely to bring a carbon shalol lishma, and you're going to do it in order to salvage the heter achilas basar of those two kvasim. For Tanan, I'm going to prove to you that we don't apply this principle of amod vechate bishvil shetizke. And by the way, in the Mefarshim here, they go to town. There's a whole long discussion because we have a principle called Esei Dochalosas, which certainly wouldn't apply over here. And then we have a sugya in Shabbos that says Ein Omrim Ladam Chatei B'Shvil Shetizke. But here in Kodshim, apparently, the Gemara before Rabbi Yochanan at least had this principle, a brand new principle in Kodshim of Chatei B'Shvil Shetizke. And Rabbi Yochanan is now going to disprove that principle based on a Mishnah at the end of Zvachim. What does it say there? Every chatos shedis arvu be'evrei ola. You have a mixture of the avarim that have to be burnt on the mizbech of a carbon chatos and b a carbon ola. And the question is as follows: the carbon chatos is matir the basar lachilas kohanim. A carbon ola, on the other hand, is kula kolil, and now you mixed all of it together. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer yitno lemala. Rabbi Eliezer comes up with a, I would call it almost like a loophole here, to allow you to somehow eat the basar of the carbon chat. So what does he do? He says, take this whole mixture, which has both a vari chatos and a vari ola, put it on top of the mizbeach. And what we're going to say is that the haktorah of the chatos is like eitzim. We're not going to see it as the basar of the carbon, but rather we'll view it as fuel to burn the carbon ola. And in that sense, we see that you're not allowed to be makriv, parts of a carbon, unless you do this harama, I would call it. So let me just read to you what he says over here. He says that this is based on a sugya later on in MasechesMenachos on Daf Nun Zayin. We didn't get to it yet. And the Gemara there darshans of pasuk that you're not allowed to be makriv on the mizbeach parts of a carbon that have to be eaten. So now if you put all of these limbs on top of the mizbeach, and amongst them are carbon chatos limbs, a vari chatos, which you have to eat, then you're not allowed to burn them on the mizbeach. And therefore, when you have this tarovas together with the ola, which has to be burnt, so then you're in trouble. You can't eat it because you might be eating from a carbon ola, which is a lav in the Torah. You can't burn it because you might be burning carbon chatos, which has to be eaten by the. So comes along Rabbi Eliezer, and he says, you know what? I'm going to solve this predicament. What am I going to do? I'm going to say that you're going to put all the avarim on the mizbeach, and I'm going to define and re-designate the chatos avarim that don't really belong on the mizbeach. They should be eaten by the kohen. But I'm going to say, you know what? I'm adding extra fuel and eitzim to burn the carbon ola. Chacham Omer, no, we can't allow that. To ubar to rosam the yetzu beis hasreifa. Okay, basically that puzzle. Again, we don't have time now, but it's a long part of Kudshim as to when you say let's burn it immediately, and when you say let's wait till it's a puzzle of Yotze, and not Yotze, I'm sorry, of Lina. Lina meaning leave it beyond its time period, and then it becomes to Uber Rasam, and then we could burn it. Again, that has to do with two categories of psulim. There's psul machmas atzmo begufo and psul shalo machmas dover acher, whatever it might be on mine. So now we're trying to understand why is it that in this case of a taroves, we're going to have to destroy the basar according to the chachamim. They don't accept the harama, I call it, of Rabbi Eliezer. Lema, why not say amod v'chatei b'shvil shetizke? Why don't you say that, okay, if you take the Evarim of the Chatos onto the Mizbeach, and they should be eaten by the Kohen, then you violated a Chet. But let's do it there. What do I gain by it? We don't have to now burn the Evarim of the Olah outside of the Mizbeach. There's a mitzvah and a kiyum of burning all the Evarim of an Olah on the Mizbeach. So therefore, why did the Chacham say that we have no choice, but rather two birds rosh beis hasreifa? Why not do this? Why not just simply overlook the chet of the chatos, meaning of burning the avarim of a chatos, which you're not allowed to do because it has to be eaten, and let's just salvage the mitzvah of burning the olah on the mizbeach, instead of just sending it out to the Beis HaSreifa. The Gemara says no. Amod v'chatei b'chatos b'shvil shetizke b'chatos amrinon, but amod v'chatei b'chatos b'shvil shetizke b'olah amrinon. We only say amod v'chatei b'shvil shetizke within the same category of a carbon. So we can do it with a chatos for the sake of a chatos, but we can't do it with a chatos and violate an iser of sreifas basar chatos for the sake of a carbon olah. Gemara says, wait a minute. Are you saying that if it's within the same category of a carbon, then we apply the principle of chatei b'shvil shetiz? Kevatanya, what are we going to do with the brisa? Kivsei atzeres shesh chatan shelo lishman. You went ahead and you shechted the kivsei atzeres shelo lishman, or alternatively, shesh chatan bein lifnei zmanam, bein liachar zmanam. Right, you shechted before the time, let's say before Chag HaTzeres, or after Chag HaTzeres, Hadam Yizarek, the Brisa says that you go ahead and you do a zrika on the dam, V'abasar ye'achel. Okay, so far so good. We understand very well that you could do the zrika, and the zrika will be matir the basar, and you take the evarim, and you burn them on the mizbeach, and you take the basar of the kivsei atzeres and you eat them. Fine. So everything seems to work out okay. And again, it's shalol lishman. Fine. Oh, but now we have a problem. Im hoisa Shabbos. If he had this machshava shalol lishma on Shabbos, and now we have to introduce the Iser of Shabbos lo yizrok. We don't do the zrika because it's not a Shavuos sacrifice, because it was either before Shavuos or the day after Shavuos. And now we have a Shavuos derabanan of zrikas hadam. Okay, now why zrikas hadam is a Shavuos derabanan? That probably has to do with what we call misake mana or makabeh patish. But again, all this is a Shavuos derabanan. And therefore, lo yizrok. It's on Shabbos, he can't do the zrika. V'im zorak hurtza. However, the evet, if he went and he did the zrika, then there's a ritzi lahaktere murim la'erev. Again, on Shabbos itself, you cannot be maktir the emurim because that's a malach of Shabbos. And it's not Ola Shabbos b'Shabbato because it was Shalol Lishma. So what do? You wait till after Shabbos. And since they did the Zrika on Shabbos, the Zrika post facto, so to speak, is matir the basar for Haktorah al Gabi Mizbeach. And that's exactly what we do. After Shabbos, we'll do the Haktorah al Gabi Mizbeach. The Amai. So the Gemara asks the following question. Based on the premise that you said that within the same carbon, we apply the principle of Chatei B'Shvil Shetizke Lema, why don't we say Amod Chata B'Shvil Shetizke? In other words, do the Zrika on Shabbos, which is a violation of an Isa Shvus, and the benefit that you get is now you don't have to destroy the carbon. Oh, yeah. Oh, so we have to add 1 point that there's a psul of Shkiyas HaChama here, right? Because we said that we have to wait till after Shabbos. And if we have to wait till after Shabbos, then we're going to have to destroy the carbon. So Gemara says, no. Amod chata b'Shabbos k'dei shtizke b'Shabbos amrina. Now we have to have a violation of Shabbos for the sake of Shabbos. But Amod chata b'Shabbos k'dei shtizke b'chol lo amrina. In other words, if you want to gain the basar of the carbon for after Shabbos, we can't violate the Shabbos for the sake of salvaging the basar after the Shabbos. So Gemara now goes back to the original hanocha that when you have two different categories, uvitarti mili lama, we don't apply the principle of chatei b'shvil shetizka. Tanya, what do we do with the Mishnah, Batran? And this is a Mishnah in the 8th parak of Tmura that says, chavish al truma shenishba begas ha'elyona. Right, they used to have a gas that would press the grapes, and the wine or the juice that would come out of the grapes would go down into a vat. And b'tachtona chulin tmei. What's the problem here? That in the receptacle on the bottom you have chulin tmeim. When the truma is now going to flow down from the Elyona down to the Tachtona, it's going to get mixed up with chulin tmeim, and then the truma now is contaminated by mixing with the chulin tmeim. So what do you do in this case? So that's machlokas tanoim. Mode Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, she'im yochel lahatzil mimenu revius betara yatzil. If, as a result of collecting from the tar, right, from the Elyona, before it flows into the Tachtona, and you could salvage a revius of truma, then yatzil. In other words, even though the remaining balance of the truma is now going to be tameh by flowing into the Tachtona, and not only that, but now you won't even be able to drink the chulin, because now the chulin is mixed up with truma tmeya, and we don't know where the chulin are. So therefore, these tanoim will agree that if at the end of the day you'll be able to salvage at least a revius of truma, meaning wine that's truma, bitara, then that's what you'll do. Even though you're being gorem a loss to the chulin. But we're going to want to gain the truma, in this case, the revius of truma, salvage that, because if you don't do anything, it's going to all become tameh, and you have to burn it when it reaches the Tachtona. But in lav, if, on the other hand, you don't have the possibility of grabbing onto a revius of truma in the state of tara before it flows down. Then Rabbi Eliezer Omer, and here we turn to Daf Mem Chesam and Beis, Tered v'titma. Then allow the truma to flow down into the tachtona. It'll be immediately contaminated. It'll become tomei because of the chulin tmeim that's in the tachtona. But v'al yitam ena biyad. In other words, it's best here that you allow, so to speak, the forces of nature to take its course, and the truma will become tummy because it flows down into the bottom vessel. And this is all because imlav. What does imlav mean? That he's not able to salvage a revius of yayin truma, yayin shel truma b'tara. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, af yitamenu biyad. We're going to go a step further. We're going to allow a person to take that kli, that receptacle that's on the bottom of the tachtona, and we're going to allow him to be metame the truma biyadav. Why is that so? Because if he'll be metame the truma biyadav, then he'll be able to salvage the chulin. Let's see if I'm right. Just one second. Right. He'll contaminate the truma in order to save the chulin. And we just established that the principle of amod v'chatei v'shvil tizkeh will only apply if it's the same min, if it's the same category. But here, we're going to allow you to be metame truma v'yadayim, which is a chet, for the sake of salvaging the chulin, and it's min b'sheino mino, so to speak. Two different categories. Like when it's shadi hasam dilatuma ka'azla. Oh, this is a Gemara in Masechta Bava Kama, that when something is on its way to be destroyed, then it's considered already as if it's destroyed. Like, for example, you have, a chayfetz that fell from a high roof, and then you smash it before it hits the ground. You're not chayav because it's as if it was already smashed. It was going to hit the ground in any event. And here also, l'tuma ka'azla, in the same way that this truma, if you do nothing, is anyway going to become tameh because it's flowing down into the chulin tmeim, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yeshua, we're going to allow you to be metame biyad, which is again a chet of being metame the truma biyad, in order to salvage the chulin before the truma falls into the chulin, because once the truma falls into the chulin, then you have to destroy the chulin as well. Okay, let's see how we're doing over here. We have another 2 minutes. Let's see what we can chaparai in here in 2 minutes. Ki asa Rabbi Yitzchak Tani. Rabbi Yitzchak, in the case of the kivsei atzeres, for the matir of and mekadesh of the shtei lechem, kivsei atzeres sheshchatim shelo k'mitzvason, if he did the shchita of the kvasim shelo k'mitzvason, which probably means that he had a machshava shelo l'shma, right? Shelo l'shma, Rashi says. Oh, here we have another shita that the kvasim are too old, right? A keves after a year can no longer be a keves. Now it has din of an ayil. It could be used for a korban olah, but not for a korban shlomim. And therefore psulin. Utubar tzrosav v'yetzel beis hasreifa. Omer of Nachman, mar demakish lehu lechatas tonips. Oh, this is a whole sugya about hekesh. I don't know if we should start this sugya. This is like a gigantic sugya in Kodshim. So I think we'll stop here.
All right, shkoyach. So
and
be
hopefully
safe.
We'll hear better news and have a Freilich Purim.
Yeah,
how's
you
how's the
too.
weather there in Canada?
Quite cold.
Quite cold. Oh, all right. Well,
Yeah,
Purim
it's
is usually cold, but
Yeah.
hang in there because it'll be July soon and it'll get warm.
Yeah.